We have just had a federal election here in Australia, with the winter Labor potentially having some serious ramifications for Australia's policy on Israel, especially if the hard left anti-Israel Labor can spread their influence. As far as I'm concerned, worrisome times ahead down under as to many issues. Closer to home from Israel's perspective, its northern neighbour, Lebanon, has also had an election 2.5 weeks ago that threw up some very surprising results. Joining us tonight again on L'chaim is senior Israeli military intelligence expert, Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Sarit Zehavi, who the Jerusalem Post last year included in their top 50 most influential Jews as the woman explaining the Hezbollah threat to the world. Sarit, welcome back to L'chaim. It's great to have you join us again.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Sarit, it's been a while since you were with us, early September last year, when we discussed Biden's and the West's evacuation from Afghanistan with the implications for Israel and the Middle East. As I mentioned in the introduction, the Lebanon election has some surprising results, with the Hezbollah-led coalition losing its majority in parliament and 14 independents gaining seats. Please, could you take us through the election outcome, how you and Elma have analysed it with what appears to be somewhat of a political stalemate?
First, I must emphasize, because it was written all over, newspaper in English, at least in Hebrew, that Hezbollah was defeated. This is a little bit more complex than saying that. The political key in Lebanon is divided by religious sects: Druze, Christians, Shiite Muslims, and Shiite Sunnis. And those among the Christians and the Druze and also the Sunnis who were allied with Hezbollah actually lost the elections. And that's why it will be more difficult to establish a coalition based on Hezbollah. But actually, Hezbollah and Amal, which are both the leading Shiite Muslim parties in the Lebanese parliament, preserved their specific seats and the amount of seats they had. This is important since we can learn from that few things. Though maybe it'd be difficult to establish a coalition, it means that the Shiite base of Hezbollah still support this party and terrorist organization and military militia and social movement. So Hezbollah succeeded in preserving its base among the Muslim Shiite population of Lebanon. It failed to draw the support of its allies. And over there, I think part of that is also deriving from the political and economic crisis that Lebanon is experiencing in the past few years, in a sense that many Christians and others left Lebanon. So the numbers are changing and demography is changing, and the way to look at that is changing, even though there was some percentage of vote from Lebanese in the diaspora. So Hezbollah preserved its power among its natural supporters, among the society that it is providing to a lot of services, lost the support of others, which many of them were the opponents of Hezbollah among their religion anyway. This means that it will be very difficult to establish a government, because Hezbollah will not enable to establish a government that is completely against it. And in the past decade, not a single political decision was made without the support of Hezbollah. And bear in mind that Hezbollah as a militia is actually stronger than the Lebanese army. Now, you mentioned the success of the independent candidates. This is true, but Hezbollah developed a high capability of buying these, whether by paying them money or by intimidating them. And we'll see now how much time it will take until Hezbollah will succeed to buy some of these independent candidates in order to create a coalition the way it wanted to.
So it's almost as you were still. Hezbollah retains its power. As you indicated, Hezbollah didn't lose any of the seats. It was the coalition partners, and that's a bit alarming. The independents can be bought off. What may be a bit of a likely stalemate outcome, any chances of any economic, political or social improvement for Lebanon?
Look, the Lebanese are tired of the current situation, and they complain not only against Hezbollah, but also against all the others. And that's why you saw so many independent candidates. Whether it will bring to a change, my most professional and personal opinion, I have kind of a debate, because professionally, when I look at Lebanon, I see a country that lost the prospect, and many Lebanese lost their belief in this country. And that's very sad, because I live very close to this country, and my origin, my grandmother was born in Beirut. So personally, I resist that, and I want to say that there is still hope and change. But when I'm looking at what is happening in Lebanon and how strong is Hezbollah, and the fact that the Shiites that support Hezbollah becoming the majority of the Lebanese in Lebanon, I don't know what will cause the change unless the Lebanese diaspora will wake up and, either come back or do something radical that will completely change the picture.
As you indicated, the demographics are changing, but it's still a balagan there. Does the election result raise the spectre of a new power struggle? Is civil war a prospect?
This is very interesting because the Lebanese greatest fear was always another civil war. They experienced a civil war between 1975 to 1991, 15 years of civil war that completely ruined the country. Everybody were fighting. Everybody, by the way, ended with an agreement that settled this political key that I've mentioned and also said that all the militias in Lebanon will be disarmed except for Hezbollah. That's how actually they preserve the power of Hezbollah. But this civil war ended like more than 20 years ago. So the younger generation didn't experience that. The younger generation saw the implications of the civil war in Syria, but didn't experience the civil war in Lebanon. And the real question is whether in like 5 or 10 years, this younger generation will not be afraid anymore to go out to the streets. Now, we have seen, some incidents here and there in the past 2 years that everybody were asking, oh, is this a civil war? Is this going to a civil war? And the more old leadership that experienced the civil war, that are truly afraid of the civil war, succeeded in compromising between the sides and calming things down. But I guess that as the years go by, this will be more and more difficult.
Wait and see. Sarit, there are reports of the use of civilian flights being used to fly in weapons from Iran to Hezbollah via Beirut. Your views on this?
Yeah, I saw the reports. I must tell you, we know that this is happening for years. That there are direct flights, including civilian flights, from Tehran to Beirut, where the ammunition is below the seats of the passengers. But what was published now is that this is going through Europe. And I'm not sure why would the Iranians do that through Europe if they can do it either from Damascus or straight to Beirut. It's too long of a route and it's too dangerous to be caught. So I don't know. It's a question.
Okay. Yet to be answered. Sarit, the recent elimination of Hassan Khoidari, a colonel in Iran's Quad Force, the Revolutionary Guard's foreign arm. Israel was stabbed in the back by the US Democrat administration, letting it known that it was Israel behind the assassination. Why was Khoidari targeted for assassination? Iran vows revenge. How do you see this playing out?
What you just said is according to the New York Times, so I must be very careful. Well, assuming the New York Times is correct, not always, but assuming the New York Times is correct, I think that the reason to take off Khoidari was fighting terror, as simple as that. Khoidari was involved in planning terrorist attacks against Israelis and Jewish sites in various places around the globe, beginning from Cyprus, Colombia, in Europe. And, instead of just each time to find the terrorists that are planning the specific plan, this time somebody went for the commander and killed the commander to send a clear message to Iran, to those who are dealing with terror, are not going to stay alive for long enough.
Sarit, Israel has sought to stake out a cautious position between Russia and Ukraine and remain in Russia's good stead for its security needs in the Middle East. With there having been some very serious verbal hostility directed towards Israel from the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, is Israel's Ukrainian situation of neutrality having a bad effect on Israel on its free flight policy over Syria and Lebanon?
Is Israel truly neutral? If Israel is truly neutral, why do we have a crisis in the relationship with the Russians? If we are truly neutral, how come we are the only country that sent field hospital with 200 of beds and tens of doctors and nurses to the war zone inside Ukraine, not in Poland, not in Moldova, inside Ukraine to treat the Ukrainians? If we are natural, how come we voted with the West in the UN? So we're probably not that natural that, as everybody likes to say. We had to walk between the drops when all of that started. I think that the main dilemma here around the issue of Ukraine, one is the fact that, yes, if we're having a crisis with the Russians, we can't know where this is heading, since the Russians are very much involved in our border, especially in Syria. And we don't know whether the Russians will choose to punish Israel by taking, steps and limiting our freedom of operation in Syria, which until today didn't happen, I must say. The second risk is actually kind of weird because, for us, it was much more comfortable if it was the West, it was more involved. in the region. But when we have Russia that is involved, and Russia became in a competition over influence in Syria with Iran, there is kind of a competition between Russia and Iran over Syria. So anywhere the Russians are leaving from Syria, Iran is getting in. We see this happening already. So, it's kind of funny that on the one hand, it's not very comfortable for us to have the Russians on the other side of the border. And on the other hand, it's better than to have the Iranians on the other side of the border. And for now, we have both. And I hope it will stay like that. We have both, and we're not going to have only Iran on the other side of the border.
The better of two evils. Sarit, after spending 15 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, specializing in military intelligence, you then founded and are the CEO of ELMA, a non-profit and independent research and education center specializing in Israel's security challenges on the northern border. You've briefed hundreds of groups and forums ranging from US senators, congressmen and women and politicians to senior journalists and visiting VIP groups in Israel and overseas, also scripting numerous position papers and updates focusing on Lebanon, Syria, and Israel's national security challenges. Prior to the cholera COVID, you had 40, 50 groups monthly visiting the Alma Center in the Galilee. This dried up completely during COVID. We heard from our radio tour guide last week, Effie Jacoby, who you know well, that tourists are back in droves in Israel. Have the groups returned to the Alma Center?
Yes, big time. During May, we had 50 groups that either came to Alma Center or we met them at the borders or at the hotels. We have 4 speakers, and we are looking forward to see you here.
That's amazing. What do you take the groups through?
There are various educational programs here, either visiting the borderline and actually taking a look at Lebanon or Syria. You can see clearly the presence of Hezbollah on the other side of the border or around the tunnels of Hezbollah, so even standing on the Israeli side. Our flagship program is a simulation. The groups that are coming to Alma Center are coming to a situation room, and after they are briefed at the borders, they actually becoming the Israeli government, and they need to make decisions around the security crisis on the border. We also have a workshop that enables them to get to know more about history and, myths and facts around Israel's security and geopolitics. And the last thing, which I think is also very interesting, is the issue of minorities in Israel. We bring speakers that don't represent, but they are coming from various communities in Israel, Druze, Christians, Muslims, and they in the group can ask them questions, like should the expert ask them questions about their life as a minority in Israel.
That's amazing. Good to hear. Great to hear. Sarit, I receive a most informative email from Alma on a weekly basis. If our listeners would like to follow and support the work of Alma, what should they do? How do they follow you?
You can definitely subscribe to our newsletter on the website. Our website is israel-alma.org. You can reach out to us over there as well. We will be happy to answer all of your questions around Israel geopolitics.
Terrific. And you're on Facebook as well and Twitter. Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Sarit Zehavi, the Jerusalem Post's 45th most influential Jew, as the woman explaining the Hezbollah threat to the world. Thank you so much for joining us again on L'chaim, To Life, Jewish Life and More, with your very important work and insight. Yasher koyach to you and Team Alma. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Stay well.